Good morning, Primary 7. Today we're going to be looking at dividing by 10, 100 and 1,000. So yesterday we looked at multiplying by 10, 100 and 1,000. Some of you worked with whole numbers and others worked with decimals. Just to recap the learning from yesterday, when multiplying by 10, we move the numbers one place to the left so that the number becomes larger. We then have to add a 0 to the end column so that we understand the number is larger than before. So if we had 3 and we were timesing by 3 by 10, we would move the 3 from the units column into the tens column, and then we would add the 0 into the units column because we've gone from having 3 units to now we have 3 tens, but there's no units in that units column, so that becomes a 0. When we're multiplying by 100, we need to move that 3 2 decimal places. So that 3 with the units moves from the units column all the way to the hundreds column, and then we know we've timesed it by 100, so we need to add 2 zeros in because we've got no tens in the tens column and no units in the units column. So when we're timesing 3 by 100, it becomes 300. And likewise, when we're multiplying by 1,000, we're moving the numbers 3 places to the left. So those 3 units become 3,000, and then again we've got nothing in the hundreds column, so we put a 0 in there, nothing in the tens column, so we put a 0 in there, and nothing in the units column. If you want to pause this video now, you can go back to yesterday's learning with the recap and see if that helps you with what we were learning yesterday. If you're ready to move on, we'll look at what we're learning today. So here's our learning intention for today. Some of us are going to continue learning how to multiply by 10. Our mild challenge, we're going to be looking at how to divide 2 digits by 10 with no remainders. Our hot, which is also our medium challenge, we're learning how to divide a whole number by 10, 100 or 1,000. Now remember, a whole number is a number that doesn't have a decimal place. So 17 is a whole number, 37 is a whole number, 2 is a whole number. And our spicy challenge, we're learning how to divide any decimal by 10, 100 or 1,000. Right, so are we ready for today? Okay, so when we're dividing by 10, we need to remember that that's the opposite of multiplying. So when we're dividing, the numbers get smaller. So the example I have up on the screen for you is if we had a group of 50 people and we divide them equally, fairly into 10 groups, we've got 50 divided by 10. We're moving those one place to the right and we're dividing them into groups of 5. So if you look, I've got 10 green boxes and they've each got 5 people inside them. Okay? Because that's what happens when we take a group of 50 people and we divide them equally into 10 groups. We end up with 5 people in each group. So 5 units are left in each group. So now if we take a look at a larger number, when we're dividing by 10, we're going to move all those numbers one place to the right. So step number 1, I've written my number out and I've written it in my boxes that I had the other day with my 2 in the hundreds column because I've got 200, my 5 in the tens column because there's 50, and 0 in the units column. It's my number 250. Now step 2, I'm going to move all the numbers one place to the right. So that 2 goes from the hundreds column to the tens column, and that 5 goes from the tens column to the units column. Now I don't need that 0 that's in the units column anymore, so I'm going to remove that from the end because I know when I write 25, I don't need to write 25 decimal point 0. I can just write 25, and that means the same thing. So that's why I've removed that 0. Now, when we're dividing by 100, we're going to be moving those numbers 2 places to the right. So step 1, I've written my numbers out again. This time I've got 600. And then step 2, if you follow my red arrow, you can see I've moved that 6 from the hundreds column, 1 place to the tens, another place to the units, so it goes 2 places to the units column. So the 6 in the 100 becomes 6 units when I've divided by 100. I then, like before, remember that I can write 6 as 6. I don't need to write it as 6.00. So I remove those 2 decimal points from the end. Sometimes I might have numbers in those tens column and the units column, but at the moment I don't. So in the hot challenge, we're going to be concentrating on just whole 100 numbers, okay? We're not going to be worrying if the number was 654. That will be something we look at in the spicy challenge, and I'll come back to that later. Okay, so let's move on to dividing by 1,000. You can see a wee pattern forming here. When we've got dividing by 10, we're moving 1 place. When we're dividing by 100, we're moving 2 places. And when we divide by 1,000, yes, you're right, we move 3 columns to the right. So I've written my number out here. We've got a much larger number now. We've got 415,000. So you can see that I've got the 4 in the 100,000 column, the 1 in the 10,000, because that's 10,000, 5 in the thousands for 5,000, and then I've got nothing in the hundreds column, nothing in the tens column, and nothing in the units column. Now we've written that out. So moving on to step 2, I need to move all of those numbers 3 places to the right. So I'm going to start with the 4. And if you follow my little black arrows, you will see where that 4 ends up. So it bunny hops 1 place, 2 place, and ends up in the hundreds. So 400,000 becomes 400. Now that 1 in the 10,000 column, he needs to move 3 places to the right as well. So 1 step, 2 steps, he ends up in the 10th column. And finally, the 5 in the thousands column, she needs to move 3 places as well. So she goes 1 place, 2 place, and ends up in the units column. Now, if you look at my third photo, you'll see with the red arrows exactly what I mean on, exactly what I'm describing. Again, we've got these 3 zeros. Now, they haven't just disappeared, they've moved as well, and they've moved beyond the decimal point. Now, like I've described before, we know that we can write 415.000 because that's what that number is. But we don't need to do that. We can just write 415 and leave it like that. So that's what we're going to do. So step 3 says remove those zeros. We're not really removing them, we're just hiding them because we don't need to write it out, because it would be awfully long if we wrote all the zeros that we do need, because they would go on for infinity. So we don't need them, we've just written what we need. Next step. So we're now going to look at the spicy challenge. If you are doing the mild challenge or the medium challenge, you're more than welcome to watch this bit too, but you might want to pause the video, rewind, go back to the steps and start your challenge. But please feel free to come and watch this with us. Okay, spicy. We are looking at dividing decimals by 10, 100 and 1,000. Now, when we divide decimals by these numbers, we're using the same skills that we do when we divide whole numbers by 10, 100 and 1,000. We just need to make sure that you include the place marker zeros so that we understand how small that number has become. Okay, so if we take 3.5, we know that that 3 is in the units column and that 5 is in the fifths column. Okay, when we divide that by 10, we move all the numbers 1 place to the right. So that 3 jumps over the decimal place and moves into the tenths column. And that 5 moves over into the hundredths column. And then we need to put that 0 before the decimal place so that we understand that number is 0.35. Okay, that number is now less than 1. And making sure we've got that 0, make sure that people understand that. Likewise, if we were to divide 3.5 by 100, we're going to move 3.5 2 places to the right. So that 3 bunny hops the tenths column and goes into the hundredths, and the 5 moves over 2 places and ends up in the thousandths column. So we then need to make sure that we've got the 0 before the decimal place and a 0 place marking the tenths column so that we understand that we haven't got any tenths. We've now got 3 in the hundredths and 5 in the thousandths column. Okay? And then again, if we were to take 3.5 and divide it by 1,000, we're moving 3 places. So you've guessed it, that number becomes 0.0035. Okay? Now, this is what we're looking at today. The Spicy Challenge also challenges you with numbers that are greater than 10, so like 20 or 200 or 3,000 when it's multiplying. And it's the same steps as yesterday. You divide by the number, so divide by 10, and then you would divide by 2. Okay, so it's the exact opposite of what we did yesterday. If you need any help at all, do not hesitate to get in contact with myself, Mrs. Marsters, with Miss Jameson, or Miss Faulkner from P7B, or Mrs. Allen from P67. Okay, and we are more than happy to help answer your questions. You might want to rewind that video, pause it where you need it to be, and watch it a few times. That's okay too. Have a wonderful day and have a good weekend when it comes, and we will see you again next week.